All right. One final push. I promised at the start of the semester that we would talk about consciousness, and we're going to. Okay. This one might be a little bit longer than our previous ones, so just hang in for the ride. First, I want to cover just the idea that we have left some things on the table here due to circumstances. Um, there's a lot more to mind. There's other theories of mind. What we've covered so far are some basic concepts of how we and any organism can associate and build internal models of the world to use to guide our actions, right? But there's plenty more where that came from, and on a different circumstances, we would be able to spend a little bit more time on them. But we're going to leave it all here for now. So, other topics that you might see when discussing mind: how is the mind organized? What information moves where? What are the sort of the architectures of mind, in a sense? What are some good ways to model the mind? Should we be doing neural networks? What's the deal with physical symbol systems? If you've taken COG 166, you've heard some of that. And then what are all the functions of the mind, right? And we have talked about them loosely quite a lot. We have the ability to focus attention. We have the ability to perceive the world in different interesting ways. Lots of decision-making processes. We can control our motor actions and everything in between. All kinds of interesting stuff, of course. But we need to spend some time talking about some broader questions in the realm of consciousness. So, consciousness. This is a sticky question. It's an interesting concept. What do we mean by consciousness? So, in a broad sense, consciousness is everything that you experience. Not just the functions, not just what you are capable of doing, but the quality of what you personally experience in real time as you live your life. Now, a common way that we think about consciousness is in terms of, say, unconsciousness. When you're asleep, right? When we sleep, there's lots of stuff going on, and we even actually dream, but we have lost a certain awareness of our surroundings, right? And this awareness is an important piece of the way that we talk about consciousness and unconsciousness. And that's accurate. But there's another level of this. Here's the question: am I dreaming? Have you ever had that thought? Sometimes you're kind of somewhere between totally unconscious in a dream world and totally awake, right? You're somewhat aware, somewhat not. You may have heard of lucid dreaming. That's where you can actually become aware that right this second you are in fact dreaming. It's really kind of cool. If you've never experienced it, it's a fascinating moment where you realize that everything you're seeing is just being made up by your mind. It's pretty crazy, but it's interesting. Go have a look on the time that you have. But this illustrates an important kind of distinction. We're talking about two different kinds of conscious, right? Everyday use of consciousness typically is talking about, sleep or zoning out or whatever, right? And this idea that we can swap back and forth between aware and unaware. We can be partially or fully aware during our normal day, but also, during our dreams. So really, when we're talking about consciousness, we're talking about a bigger question. The stronger question is, how is it that we have the capacity for consciousness at all? The idea that I can be awake and attending the world around me and have the experience of that, right? I am this interesting creature. I can see and think and hear, and I have this experience. But, I mean, what if there was a robot that could do the same thing? Would it have the same experience? So, this is where we get to questions of consciousness. What are the kinds of questions we ask about consciousness? So, A primary one is, what is the nature of this experience? And I'm going to warn you up front, there's not a lot of satisfactory answers to this. We're in the realm of very much philosophy of mind type questions. The kinds of things that we have to adopt different angles to pick apart and understand the questions, and we don't necessarily get a confirmatory answer. The science needs to catch up for us to make any kind of strong claims on some of these things. Okay, so other questions related to science. Where is consciousness? If I am conscious and there is some element of my brain that makes that so, which one is it? Right? How do we define consciousness? What are the limits? What might we consider conscious and what might we not consider conscious? And then extending that, how might we be able to tell that something else might have the capacity for conscious experience? So sometimes it's useful to bind this to an example. So think about an example of, you are sweeping a shop, right? You are cleaning under every seat. You are, pushing things around. And you are experiencing this in real time. Simulate in your mind. You are sweeping every corner. You kind of smell it. You kind of, I'm asking you to use some mental imagery. I know some folks don't have quite as strong of that. But the idea is that while you are doing this task, you're having this full suite of experience. You know how it feels. You are here to observe it happening live, right? You are seeing it. Is the broom seeing it? Probably not. I think that's a simple one. It's pretty clear that a broom lacks most of the cognitive architecture you might think is required to observe its environment, at least. What about a Roomba? Roombas can actually perceive the world. They have little laser sensors and cameras. They can drive around in the world, and they can turn on their vacuum. And they're doing some kind of process in between. There's some kind of, dare I say, cognition going on inside a Roomba. Okay, so a Roomba has an interaction loop. Is a Roomba conscious? We might say it's aware of its environment, but is it conscious? Does it have a lived experience? Does it have, does it appreciate things? It's slippery. I think it's still safe to say probably not for the Roomba's case, because we kind of understand how simple these fellas are. But what do we get to the point of, okay, it's not a Roomba anymore, it's a full-on android that's just doing some vacuuming for us, right? Well, this is where the question gets complicated, because it depends on how sophisticated this android is. And it also, that's tough to answer on its own right. Is it possible that a machine of sufficient sophistication is conscious, has a self, has some kind of self-concept and identity? What about a cat? A cat is definitely closer than a Roomba to something that we might call conscious. We definitely give them personality. We even can empathize with these little critters sometimes, but are they conscious? Would they need to be? Do we need to be? These are tough questions. So back to the general idea. When you are sweeping the shop, you're doing all these tasks, you're experiencing all these sensations, you're remembering other times, you're remembering what happened today. Ooh, that spill in the corner. I remember that guy. That kind of stuff. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard to pick apart what makes up the conscious experience. And that's one of the key things that's kind of tricky. It's difficult to describe what consciousness is in these broad terms. I'm hoping I'm conveying sort of a general sense of what consciousness is, but the issue is what is the difference between something successfully completing a task and the experience of completing a task? How do we quantify the subjective experiential component of experiencing the world live, right? Let's consider one of those beautiful things, a sunset, right? We appreciate this. We experience it pretty richly, I think. We can break it down. What composes a sunset and how does it affect us? Well, there's color stimuli, all kinds of color stimuli in a particular arrangement. We have remembered experiences that may be associated with other sunsets, right? We have emotional responses to those remembrances. We have a different emotional response of some relaxation, and then we open up our minds to some reflective processes, to ask questions and think about, our past and all this kind of stuff. And it's a beautiful moment. It can be a beautiful time, and you can share it with a person, and it's great. But what I've described, these are all things that sort of follow from one another logically. We've looked at over the semester, we've looked at so many pieces of the machinery of the brain and the mind that these things kind of make sense. The stimuli trigger certain remembered experiences. Our emotional state changes, so we relax, and our responses, the memories trigger some responses, but we also have the opportunity for some reflection. We're not doing much else with our mind. We can do metacognition and think about our thinking. Okay, but then if I can explain all those processes, where is the conscious component, the part of you that is in charge of this experience? Is this stuff just happening on its own? Just like a property of physics and the fact that neurons work the way that they do? This leads us to some other questions. Am I really conscious? Or am I just a bunch of neural clockwork? The answer is not clear. I think it's, a mix of both. As always, I tread that middle path, but these are the questions. These are the questions associated with understanding consciousness. So, let's talk about some things that we can be sure of, right? I'm throwing everything up into confusion and curiosity, but let's kind of whittle down the things that we can be certain of. How can I be sure I am conscious, right? I mean, it's pretty clear to me that I'm experiencing the world, but there's some issues with that. So if I'm just a bunch of moving parts, neurons triggering other neurons in a giant complicated cascade of irreversible actions, right? Everything is going to happen the same way. If that's just all I am, if I'm just clockwork, then how am I different from a clock? Would I say that the clock is conscious just because it ticks? Is the Roomba self-aware? And we're getting to a little bit of a nihilistic question, but would it even matter if, as long as I was still behaving the same way, would it matter if I was conscious? How can I tell that I am conscious? Descartes helps us out here. Cogito ergo sum. Descartes, man of many talents, he's come up a lot in this course and others. He chased this line of questioning down. So Descartes' meditations, the primary concept is, I know that my senses can be deceived, or they can be faulty, right? I can be confused. My vision can be wrong, or poor, as I get blinder. I can hear things that aren't there. I can be startled by a dream, something my mind made up entirely. If that's true, how can I be sure that I exist in this world at all? It's tough to follow this because we're so rooted in our own experience of being a conscious thing that we never stop to wonder about how weird that is. But it's a strange thing to be conscious, to be experiencing something, that Like I said, is the Roomba conscious? Does it have a lived experience? If I break it, is a life snuffed out? Descartes was chasing this question for us. And so he comes to the idea of, okay, fine. If everything I know could be some falsehood dreamed up by someone else, maybe even I'm just a brain in a jar. He didn't use these terms, but this is a kind of a core concept. I could just be a brain in a jar being shown pictures by some nefarious entity that I will never meet. I'll just live in this jar being fooled constantly. And even further, oh, well, maybe every thought, every memory I have could be false, could just be something implanted in me. At every given moment, I'm relying on my memory. What if all the memories are false too? Where does this stop? I've included an image of the Matrix, if you've ever watched it. It's quite good for illustrating some of these topics. I recommend it. At this point, it's a classic, but you should give it a shot. Okay, but for Descartes, where does it stop? Is there ground to stand on, or is this an infinite whole? Is there no way to prove I exist? I'm just something along for the ride. Do I have any proof whatsoever that I'm real? And this is where Descartes comes to his famous phrase, cogito ergo sum. There is one slender critical piece of evidence that I exist. It's that I am asking the question, do I exist? Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Something must exist to ask this question in the first place, and I am necessarily that something. I must exist. There is no way out of it. I have to be able to ask this question. It's a powerful thought because it stops at the self-reference. The idea that if something exists to reflect in this way, then it must exist, period. Even if there are nefarious actors, even if I am being fooled by, Descartes thought Satan himself would fool every inch of us just for his own whims, right? But I mean, he wasn't scared of that phenomenon, but he used Satan and demons as the kind of example. Demons are popular in older science. So the idea being that I do have proof that I exist. Okay. Let's move on to the next question. How can I be sure anyone else is conscious? Ooh, this one's fun. All right, so I exist. I have good evidence. Descartes handed to me. Do you exist? Right now, I don't have much evidence. I'm just staring at a computer while I speak into a microphone. But even when I see you, do you exist? Are you just a figment of my imagination? Solipsism is this idea. If the whole world could be made up, but I can only be sure that I am conscious, thank you, Descartes, then it's possible that everyone else in the entire world is just a figment of my imagination. It's hard to prove that you exist, honestly. Why? I can point at you and I can push you and shove you, but again, my fingers can be fooled, my hands can be fooled. Is everything you've ever said just some kind of clever ruse to get me to think that, oh, there's a person here? This comes to a philosophy of mind question that is useful for illustrating what the problem is. The reason solipsism it feels kind of viable while you're trying it on, is that we have the idea of privileged access. You and only you have access to the contents of your own mind. You can explain it or say it, but you are the only one that has access. So I can tell you what's on my mind. I can even accidentally tell you what's on my mind through body language or something like that. But only I have direct access to it, right? And that's not always accurate. So our mental health issues can cloud our own understanding of ourselves. So the idea is that because I can't access your mind, I can't reliably measure what's going on in your brain, I can't prove that you don't exist, or that you do exist, rather. Interesting. So, taking this a slightly different direction, another possibility is if you've ever heard of philosophical zombies, philosopher zombies. Perhaps everything does exist. Maybe you're there, of course, and you're not trying to fool me, but maybe you're not conscious. Maybe you're just a zombie. And that's not the brain-eating type of zombie. That is the idea that there are people in this world that just go through the motions and are not switched on inside. They are just the automaton. They are just the Roomba. But there's nothing going on. There's no internal life. There is no self or identity or experiential component to their lived life. They are just blank inside. Now that's not typically fair. It's actually kind of a way to disparage people by calling them philosopher zombies. But it's the idea that even beyond the fact that, okay, fine, even if we're going to go outside of Descartes and say, okay, the world is observable, there are certainly people in it, there are things happening in it, perhaps it's still possible that everyone else is just going through the motions. And only I am conscious, only I am real. Oof, it's a trippy thought. There's a key issue, though, that makes solipsism not very ideal for something that we, want to rely on to guide our lives, right? We're going to talk about that quite a bit. Things that are interesting but not good for guiding our behavior. I would call solipsism futile. And I would say that because one of the key problems is that it's not useful. Even assuming everything and everyone is a figment of your imagination, you still need to talk to people and get on the subway and do everything during your day, right? You still need people. So there's another issue connected to that, is that it actually violates one of the key principles of mind we've discussed, and that is that the mind's goal is to make sense of the chaos of the outside world that we can't be sure of, right? We touched on this a little bit. I need to form new associations from the patterns that are consistent in the world. So whether you exist or not is secondary to whether you consistently behave as if you exist, as if you have consciousness, as if you are a sovereign entity, right? From my end, I'm certainly hoping to convey that I am a conscious entity that responds to your own behaviors, but, that may vary. And this comes in, this brings up empathy. So when you indicate to me that you have an internal experience, anything, sorrow, confusion, headache, any kind of internal sign of your internal life, a reflection on your internal state, then that's actually external evidence that we might share a similar internal life. And that's useful because despite this fact that there is a sort of philosophical gap between me and you, this privileged access, we can still show each other a bit of what's going on inside, and we can connect, right? It's important. And that doesn't matter if it's true or not. I just need to be able to count on the way you will behave, right? So, and the more empathy we have, the better that's used. This manifests further in the concept of the theory of mind you may have heard of. Theory of mind. It's super useful in your cognitive toolkit. Being able to predict what others might be thinking is useful, right? Why is she angry? What is that guy talking about? He hasn't quite given me all the details, but maybe I can infer based on what I know about him, right? Understanding how someone might behave in a particular task, right? So being able to understand, or at least have some kind of internal concept of the minds of others is really useful. We see here a little idea of first order mind reading is just seeing that we are there, theory of mind. Second order would be I have the theory of your experience, and then third order would be I have the theory that you also have a theory of my experience, that kind of stuff. He knows that she knows that he knows that she knows. That kind of thing. And then all this comes about because we don't live in a solipsistic world. Even if you and only you are the only conscious entity, it doesn't matter because science doesn't care. It is just a fact that there are other people out here that you're dealing with. And if they're fake or not, it doesn't end up mattering. This isn't to dismiss the questions. It's to say that some of these questions are very powerful and guide a lot of understanding of the science. And some of the questions are more trying to get at something that's more intangible. So just pointing out the distinctions between the mechanisms of mind that we have discussed or would potentially discuss versus some of the philosophical questions of consciousness. There are some divisions. So can I be sure that I'm not the only one? No, I can't ever be sure of that. You just have to get comfortable with that. And that it feels unnerving, but that's just how it works. It's certainly more useful, though, to behave as though everyone else in the world does exist and does share a similar kind of internal life to you. Anyone who demonstrates the workings of their minds, we might as well give them the benefit of the doubt and say, hey. Also, I've put a little note about the Truman Show here. If you've ever seen that, I recommend it as well. Jim Carrey in a serious role. Quite good. This is the movie about the guy whose whole life is a constructed fabrication of everyone around him acting. His life has become a show for this experimental TV series, and his every moment alive is documented on this program. And everyone around him is fake. No one has the jobs they say. No one has the life they say. Everyone is a character. And he lives in that life until finally one day he finds out and leaves. Sorry to spoil the ending, but come on. How would you expect it to end? So the point being that it bears resemblance to the idea of waking up and coming beyond the solipsism of the world. So, okay. So we've talked about some of the basic things that we can and perhaps cannot know, but things that are useful to believe still, right? To get by in my day, it's useful to believe other people have internal life. We can also talk about things in terms of the concept of identity. Identity is typically associated with your uniqueness, the thing, your unique presence in the world. If nothing else, your unique physical location, right? But there are other things that might make you define your identity, right? We understand ourselves a lot. A lot of our understanding of ourselves has to do with how we are different from others, and what comprises our unique identity. It's kind of tricky. It's not always the same, and it comes up in a lot of different domains. Math. There's identity rules for one is the identity number, that kind of stuff. Law, the identity of somebody in a legal sense. Computer programming, what is the identity of an object, a data object, these kinds of things. But what defines our identity? Our uniqueness, our stable, the thing that makes us us, right? Makes me, and you. Let's talk first about Theseus's ship. This is an old allegory. It's not really clear that this was an actual event, but Theseus and his crew operated and maintained his ship, Theseus's ship. Over time, this ship needs repairs. One board at a time, the ship is updated over the years. Who knows how many times, just continuously, until the whole thing is, it's continuously shiny and new. But at the same time, as a cost-saving measure, some dock workers have been saving those discarded boards. And then as who knows why, as some kind of vanity project, they start reconstructing the original ship in its original condition. The boards are a little bit dusted and perhaps rotted or sun-bleached, but it's back to the same state it was in initially. Theseus discovers this and shouts, "How dare you steal my ship?" And one of the workers says, "Is this your ship?" Let's walk through it. So, ship at Theseus. First plank is replaced. Second plank is replaced. Third plank is replaced. So on and so on and so on for many, 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 many planks until ultimately we got two ships. Which one is Theseus's ship? Which one inherits the identity of the original Theseus's ship? There is not a strong answer. Did the iteration count more? The active ship that inherits its identity over time, step by step from each previous iteration? Or was the original configuration the key thing that defined it as the ship, right? The discarded ship is actually more like the original ship. It has more of the same boards. It has more of the same sails and the same structures. Oh, well, we should say they both have the same structure, right? Same boards in the same locations, that kind of thing. But the active ship has much cleaner boards, and it has a history. It's been used as Theseus' ship for a long time. Which one of these ships is the original ship? This poses a conundrum. This points at the idea that identity can also be a bit slippery to define. You, yourself, are not all that unlike Theseus' ship. Every 5 to 15 years, most of the cells in your body are replaced. Some of them you retain, but some important ones that you might not even think you replenish do, like your hippocampus. Apparently this has some regenerative properties that most of the rest of the brain doesn't. Hippocampus has a lot to do with memory. Whew. So, do you notice? Has it changed your identity now to think back and say, oh shoot, 5 years ago I was a lot of different cells? Mostly no, but it's a curious question. Who was that person 5 years ago? 10 years ago? Who were you? Is this the method that we use to understand our identity? In some ways, I think so. I think in other ways, no. I can pull out my license and say, hey, I possess this license, therefore I'm this guy. But there's more to it. There's a deeper question that's harder to answer. We can explore this deeper by talking about cyborgology. Not an official term, just a friendly one I made up. We can extend this further. Assume that the technology reaches a point where we can safely and consistently replace damaged neurons. So even if we age out of our brain's, lifetime, we're able to install tiny components that replace and function just exactly like the components they're replacing. So a little electrical system that behaves the same. It makes the same errors. It learns the same way, right? All it's doing is replacing some stretch of neurons that would take some input from other neurons and exert some output that could interface with neurons, right? Okay, so assuming this is possible, assuming we can gradually brain mod ourselves forward, right? One little chunk at a time, I replace my brain. Is there ever a point where I switch off? Where my consciousness dissipates? Where I lose whatever self I am and just become a machine? Or is it this constant iterative upgrade that keeps you continuous? Is there one little piece of your brain where that makes this all fall apart? If so, where is that? It may be in there, but it also might not. It's hard to say. I know, it's not satisfying. It can be frustrating to think about some of these questions, but I think that's important to know the edge of what we understand. So we've started with things we understand quite well, and we're exploring now things that we understand quite less. But we have lots of good terms for understanding and categorizing and discussing this stuff. So let's carry on. So this was the idea of identity. We have an identity, but it's not clear how that might evolve if we were to continuously replace little bits of ourselves. We can also talk about the self, which is related to identity, but it's more of sort of a noun version, right? We know of ourselves. Self happens in most languages, the concept of it, and it maps pretty well onto the general concept of consciousness. If something exists to experience the world, then that thing is the self. It's something, right? But what is the self? How do we define the self? Well, self is where the world stops and I begin. That's good. That's useful. But how do I draw that distinction? If the self is my body, what happens if I lose a limb? If the self is my brain, what happens if a tamping pole blasts through the top of my skull? If my memory's not so good, is that screwing with myself? Where is the line? This could be familiar. We've discussed before the homunculus, the idea of the homunculus. And this is the idea that there's somebody in there watching, right? But, and that maps pretty decently onto the ideas of consciousness that we're discussing, right? Okay, cool. I have all these cool features, the memory and the attention and all this kind of good stuff going on inside my brain. Someone's in there pulling all the switches, and that's me. That's the me, right? That's the little person that is me. Except, again, whoever that person is, there's got to be some mechanism for how they function. And whatever that mechanism is, there must be some function of that mechanism. So we may just be chasing the homunculus in this case. For a time, it was thought that the pineal gland was the location of the self. The idea was that the pineal gland was where the mind and the body meet. That's, it helped to solve some of the dualist questions of the day, but it turned out not even to be close. Pineal gland regulates certain hormones, but doesn't have much to do with consciousness or even awareness or anything like that. A little bit of melatonin, right? But this was one of those first attempts to explain, hey, there's a specific spot in your brain that if you damage it, you switch off, and everything else works, but you are gone. You have died, in a sense. So they weren't quite right, but we can keep chasing this, right? And this is the concept of infinite regression. So the world, we know we're not the world, right? We know we typically draw distinctions between ourselves and the world. And that line would be drawn at the body. Okay, so my body is a self, but again, what's watching the body? Well, the mind is a logical way to look at that. But the mind has many sub-features, many different faculties of mind, right? There are different functions. Perhaps it's in memory. Well, is memory the location of the self? Is that what defines who and what the self is? What about, though, the fact that the memory is just made up of neurons? What about the fact that neurons is just made up of proteins and other biological components and chemical components? We've gone so far down the rabbit hole that it wouldn't make much sense anymore. We've gone infinite. We've gone beyond the possibility for understanding where does this dang thing live, the self, the consciousness. So that lays out some of the conundrums of consciousness in our world, and some of the terms. So general concepts that we're dealing with here: conscious experience is one thing. Cogito ergo sum. I'm able to, I think, therefore I must exist. Proof that something is here to experience the conscious world. Solipsism, the idea that maybe I'm the only one that exists, but also thoughts about identity. Do I have an identity, and how does my identity change over time, as well as the ideas of self, and what is the self? Where does it live? How do we define its edges? Okay. So now let's talk about a little bit of consciousness, how these more philosophical questions interface with science. Some of the things we've uncovered, and some of the ways that these questions actually guide our scientific pursuits. So, there's some philosophical questions. They don't have straightforward answers, of course, but until we have sufficient evidence, one's best answer to these questions is often a matter of perspective. It's fine to have different perspectives until we have better evidence, right? But these questions help inform the way that our science explores the world, and also these questions are informed by the results of that science. So there is a nice tension, positive tension, between science and philosophy in this way, that philosophy gives some guiding blueprints for things that need to be addressed, and science, works towards those things. Not all the time. Sometimes science is more just simple iterative stuff, but some science is quite philosophically grounded. So let's talk about consciousness in the brain. There's an interesting recent study. So I have all these moving parts: goals, abilities, functions, neural populations, cognitive systems, all these wonderful things, right? And it's difficult to point to where exactly consciousness lives, right? We've kind of highlighted that, consciousness and or the self. But there's been some interesting work, even as recent as 2016. So Fisher et al., tons of people. All these neuroscience papers are always tons of authors. But Fisher and several people investigated which brain regions and networks between regions might correlate with the status of being comatose, i.e. damage to these regions. So comas are a really strong starting point for understanding where we think people are switched off and no longer consciously experiencing the world around them, compared to people who are not in comas, right? So the question is, what are the neurological components that are separating people in comas from people in normal, able to interface and be aware of the world around them? So the idea is to look at which brain regions are consistently damaged in coma patients compared to those that are damaged in non-comatose patients. So what they did was examine the brain activity in both coma and control patients, right? Those who had comas, who were experiencing comas, and those who were under normal conditions. And they found small networks connecting a piece of the brainstem to two higher order cortical regions that seem to correlate with that comatose state. That is, compared to those who had the damage found in coma patients, the control patients didn't experience the same damage in these areas. 11 out of 12 coma patients had damage in this region, this subregion. Look into the paper yourself if you really are curious about the names of these things. I didn't find them critically important for the discussion because there's a lot of pieces involved. At least 3 or 4 different distinct sub areas. But the idea is that they've sort of pinpointed, there is a small circuit of neural activity that is not possible for coma patients, and thus might be related to the experiential state of being conscious. So we solved it. Yay! No, we did not. Of course not. There's so much more work that would need to be done here. We know the brain is extremely complex. And this study is an initial exploration of some of the structures involved, as with much neuroscience. It's not an exhaustive search. It is a question of, where can we start, right? Because another question at the end of the day is a coma really a non-conscious state, or is it more like an incredibly deep dream? Still exciting. Very cool stuff. We're beginning to find the edges of what might make us conscious or unconscious, and that's a clear good start. Okay. Another realm where self comes up quite interestingly is in psychology. We have the conceptual self. And, doesn't matter if there's a strong definition for exactly where the self lives, there is still sort of the higher order concepts that help us define self. In their depiction, in the psychological take on the conceptual self, it's just this useful tool to reflect on the process of being a living, thinking thing, right? There's your self-concept, there is your self-esteem, how you treat yourself, your social self, how you project yourself to other people, and there's your knowledge about yourself, and these all feed into one another. The idea being that these are all concepts that sort of orbit the idea of it's information about me. The thing that is doing the thinking, it might need to keep tabs on itself at times, right? So, psychology considers the self mostly in terms of the knowledge and behaviors we have about our own overall system. Now, an interesting place we've taken this is we've done some comparative research on self-concept. They do these mirror studies with animals where they will put a little dot on the animal's face and then show the animal a mirror. Any animal that sees the dot and reacts to it, starts, fumbling around, touching it, trying to explore it, they understand that what they're seeing in the mirror is them. That's remarkable because a lot of animals have no such concept. You ever see a cat get in front of a mirror? They typically start freaking out. Well, when they're young. Older cats don't care for much. I can prove that. The animals that are able to show, hey, I have enough self of a representation of what I am and who and what I am, my identity and myself, that I recognize myself in a mirror. I just know that that's me. Versus, cats and dogs that start slapping the mirror, trying to figure it out. Some animals have this. These are primates, elephants, dolphins, and some birds have this ability to recognize, hey, something's wrong, somebody put a smudge on me that I'm going to clean off. Now that's interesting. Is that enough for us to say that they are conscious? Not quite sure, but it certainly steps towards it, right? Anything that has this self-concept, rather. And see how we're starting to blend the terms? Anything that has this sort of self-concept is certainly closer to consciousness than something that might not, right? But it's still not clear. It's tough to have a conversation with a chimp to understand if, hey, are you conscious? Can you show me the contents of your mind and explain them to me? So, yeah, that's a way that we have taken this in the actual, in research. Some cool stuff in animal comparative research. There's also a broader approach that falls out of these same kinds of questions about where to draw the line. So we can draw the line of what we actually consider cognition in different ways. Typically, historically, we just say anything the brain does is cognition, and that makes sense, right? And like we discussed before, if you chase the homunculus down to try to determine where the self lives, you just wind up with infinite regression. Who's watching whom. But one solution to this kind of issue is, it's not really a solution, it's just sort of taking advantage of the fact that there is not a strong definition and saying, hey, I can actually look at cognition with different lenses. I don't need to have one strong, consistent look. I can look at it different ways. So there are two approaches that kind of shift the way that we consider cognition. Embodied cognition and extended cognition. And these are both really good ideas that help to guide research towards different kinds of questions than you would typically get if we just lived entirely inside the mind. So, embodied cognition, it's the idea that we're doing away with this special distinction that the brain is where all cognition lives. The brain certainly does tons of the work, but so does the nature of your body. And a nice way to explain this is you can walk, period. Well, I don't assume any of you have gotten into wheelchairs recently, but if you have, I'm sorry. But you can do all kinds of things with your body, regardless. You can move, you can move your arms, you can do all kinds of stuff, right? But an important piece of that is that we don't control directly, your brain does not control directly every single neuron activation in your arms. Some of that is just reflex. Some of it is just sinew, the way that your ligaments all connect to one another, the springiness of your legs. That all factors in. It's all a piece of the machinery that your brain is trying to maneuver. And that leads us to the idea that some cognition, absent the pieces of machinery that they're trying to exploit, like the legs, it ceases to be cognition. It would just be kind of pointless firings that wouldn't help, wouldn't achieve anything. The legs are part of the cognitive circuit. I think that makes sense. But you can extend it even further into extended cognition. So this takes that outside the body. Same ideas, but anything in the world that we directly interact with in a consistent way can be part of our cognitive processing. For example, your phone stores all your phone numbers for you. I can't remember the last time I tried to memorize a phone number on my own. There was no point. There's never been a point in the past 2 decades. But it's certainly something I rely on. And I would say that me with my phone, I can contact anyone I want, anyone I know, right? I have all these numbers. I can call anyone. I might call it part of my extended memory. And when you start to look at the world in those terms, things get more interesting. For example, you are one entity, your car is a different entity, but when you are together, you in the car, piloting the car, ooh, that's a whole different bag, huh? That is a car with the intellect of a human being. That's amazing. It's great. And you have different abilities than either of you alone. You and the car, I'm not going to go as far as to say you are one, right? But your combined, your cognition extends into the car, right? The way that you make sense of the world changes just a bit when you are sitting in a car piloting it with all of the machinery at your command, right? And your abilities change. You're not just a walker now, you can do high-speed highway maneuvering. Hopefully not too high speed and hopefully not too maneuverable. You want to keep things kind of smooth, y'all. But I hope you get it, right? You plus car is a far different beast than you alone. This informs a lot of scientific research these days. This shows different ways to consider what should we even ask about cognition. As opposed to asking about cognition in isolation, we often need to consider how is it happening in the real world and how is it happening through our bodies. Because we have these questions of, hey, why should we stop the self at the boundary of X? At the boundary of the pineal gland, at the boundary of the brain, at the boundary of the body? Something is still doing all of this work, and something is still cogniting all of this. So, consciousness in science. So this is, we're toying with the edges of understanding what it is to be conscious. We're seeing, some neural structures that play a significant role. We see animals exhibiting this kind of self-concept. And more broadly, some of these ideas come to bear to give us interesting frameworks for scientific investigation. So, extending cognition, the researchers might ask questions in a very different way than a classical, brain in a jar cognitivist. So these questions are important for scientific pursuits. and scientific pursuits help to inform these questions. There's another domain, though, where these things keep coming up, and this is just in the world, in your everyday life, and in the lives of our society, too. So some of these questions about consciousness, self-identity, all this stuff, extend to our everyday lives. And here's where I want to talk about some interesting topics. One in particular is blameworthiness. If we can investigate what may or may not have any sense of self, we can also start asking questions about whether something is capable of accepting blame. Let's look at a pretty rough example from 2018. Self-driving cars are becoming more and more prevalent, right? In 2018, we had our first death of an autonomous driving feature owned by Uber struck and killed a pedestrian walking her bike alongside the road. She may have stepped into the road, but the point being, it seemed quite avoidable. Now, setting aside the pedestrian's, possible foolish move, who's to blame here? Where does the buck stop with a self-driving car? In this case, the Uber crash, there was a driver, and they were demonstrably distracted by their cell phone, so they have a certain amount of culpability here, right? But the issue is that the car is advertised and it's autonomous mode. It honestly shouldn't have been able to hit this person. It should have had other things going on. Again, we don't know quite exactly what happened. She might have lurched out in front of this car in time, impossible time to be stopped. But the question still stands because cars ain't supposed to hit pedestrians. We all know that, and we suffer the consequences if we do. Doesn't matter if somebody was jaywalking. There's a lot going on when you strike and kill somebody. So, okay, so the driver is playing a role. But Uber deployed that car. Uber created that car and released it into the wild and said, this is good. Then there's the hordes of programmers, likely hordes. I don't know the numbers on these groups, but there are so many people involved in the development of the car's algorithms, right? The things that detect pedestrians and crosswalks and all these important things. All these things you're constantly doing the CAPTCHA for. You're helping machine vision, by the way. Anytime you do one of these reCAPTCHAs where it's like, show me all the stoplights, you're just helping cars learn how to see the road. Some of you might not like that. I think it's better than the alternative, but yeah. So, okay, but there are teams of programmers involved in this, in creating these algorithms and testing them. And the algorithms themselves are tricky because it depends on what kinds of information they are fed, how they're able to parse the world. On top of all this, the United States government has, I say they dropped the ball here, but it's arguable that just, we're in the early days. But they have a responsibility here too, because there's no good regulations in place for understanding, hey, public roads should have a certain standard of AI capabilities. These are all important questions because these people, every person on this list, bears some responsibility. But we have this curious thought. Can we blame the car? The car's pretty sophisticated. It does perceive the road. It computes various possible outcomes and actions and what it should do in various circumstances. It takes actions in accordance with those plans, and it drives. Is it culpable? Is this car alive and capable to an extent that it's capable of accepting blame? I think right now, the answer is clearly still no. But we're on the verge of some things where this question gets very murky very quickly. And so that's why I'm putting here that we are in the Wild West for law regarding AI, self-consciousness, all these things. Because these are the kinds of things that we haven't had to ask such strange questions about so far in our history. these are questions that illustrate, the idea that in the near-ish future, we're going to have a better concept of consciousness and sense of self, because right now, sure, we can come up with some good guidelines for who's responsible for these algorithms and these cars and all that, but these systems are going to become more complex. Our at-home helpers will become more and more autonomous. Siri is going to get smarter to an extent. What happens if Siri does something wrong and gets somebody killed? How do we handle near-human intelligence? It's tricky, is the answer. The idea that we're just working hard on this. This is a new frontier for law and for understanding, what is blame in the mass distributed world of all kinds of things being created by everything else in the connected structures of, say, programming, right? Okay, so another topic that is pertinent to your everyday life and can be a bit polarizing and a bit spooky at times is free will. It's related to the question that we just asked, understanding about blame and cause and effect and everything. So, do we have free will? I know, we're in the challenging questions segment. Are we these deliberate creatures that can choose our own fate? Or are we just along for the ride? Are we just dominoes falling? Things that can't be stopped. Here is the argument against the idea that we might have free will. If we're just made up of neurons which have very predictable patterns that they behave in, and those neurons make up our brains, sure. And our brains dictate the operations of our minds. No pineal gland connecting to something else out there. It's just brains and minds, right? They're sort of one and the same. Just different levels of talking about them. And all these systems and subsystems and everything else behaves in totally predictable ways. Now, they don't quite, but assuming that there are physical laws guiding them, how could I possess anything resembling free will? Maybe a deeper dive into some deterministic thinking will help understand this. So, let's talk about Laplace's demon. Demons are a typical thought experiment thing, like I discussed with Descartes. Demons are just a fill-in for thing that's strong enough, powerful enough to do some weird thing I want to thought experiment. But Laplace's demon. Imagine a demon that possesses two curious qualities. It knows the exact position and state of every atom, and even further down, quark and lepton and boson and blah, in the entirety of not the known universe, the entire universe. It has all this knowledge. Frozen, crystalline in time. It knows it all. It also knows every law of physics, chemistry, neurology, every physical law, every natural law. It knows it all. Well, what do we expect Laplace's demon to be able to do? Well, if it knows every law, it can both deduce every event that ever came before the present moment, because it can always say, hey, what events led to this current one, because I have the laws. I have the things that predict the future, so I can reason backwards and say everything that ever happened before, and I can predict everything that will ever happen hereon. This demon has a really good internal model, as we've discussed. It has a very powerful system for prediction. It can know everything before it happens, including every neural firing, every thought, every word you've ever spoken, every word you will ever speak. It can know it because it knows the laws of physics and of psychology and of neurobiology. It knows all the laws and it knows where you're at. This is, broadly speaking, determinism. The idea that given that nature is mechanistic, it is these sort of predictable processes, just as much as if I drop a ball, it will always fall in roughly the same pattern. Knowing all the rules and having all the data means you can predict everything. And if I am fully predictable, then how could I possibly have free will? It's an interesting question. If everything I do is preordained, in a sense, then I'm just sort of I'm a ball rolling down a hill. There's no changing anything that's going to happen. I will always end up in the same place, the same time, doing the same thing. It was fated to be so. Well, there are some problems with that. Because this concept set forth by Laplace's demon, this hard determinism, it doesn't super jibe well with modern chaos theory. And we won't linger too long on this. It's just an important thought because it illustrates that these are questions that are happening far above the way that we typically actually think about free will. So, chaos theory, Laplace's demon assumes that the current state of the universe is definable, but chaos theory suggests that that's actually not even possible. Our models are super sensitive to weird arbitrary things like how many decimal places do I choose to round to. They'll behave totally differently based on that. But does this mean that, okay, then free will is somewhere in that chaos, and yes, that we're in there and we're riding it and it's going fine? Ultimately, it boils down to this again, in a similar way as what we've talked about before. It's a strong question. There's still a lot of question about, like a philosophical debate about how does free will manifest, and does it even exist? Is it even possible? And what we discussed here is the idea that it's not really material to our lived experience. Ultimately, whether determinism is correct or the world is too chaotic for free will, or so either I'm totally fated one way or everything is totally random another way. The idea is, once again, we're focusing back down onto psychologically sound concepts like my decisions affect the world, right? That is an important thing for me to have internalized. That's a more useful mindset than the paralysis of wondering, ooh, is everything preordained? Oh, is even this, a fourth time? That it's not that it's not interesting to think about, and not that it doesn't expand your horizons a bit to think about these kind of tough questions of free will, but typically we still make decisions based on our understanding of the world around us, free or otherwise. So we are still embedded in our worlds, and it's far more useful to act as if you do have free will and that there is something you can do about the world around you than to just say everything is water under the bridge, right? So this touches on some of our ideas of consciousness in the world. Various fields of law are going to have to draw good distinctions about, how to describe the differences between automated, autonomous, and conscious entities, if there's distinctions at all, and what gradations and all that, so that we can make sense of the world as it gets more complicated. But there's also these hairy questions about free will, and are we all just, stuck on deterministic tracks, and how does that affect how we assign blame? If we think of things in terms of the deterministic nature of the people that we and you are, there's a middle ground, right? Free will is certainly, we have this decision-making capabilities, but there's also a lot of context and environmental factors and upbringing and learning, long lifetime learning, that kind of stuff. It all connects in a lot of ways, and it's important to consider when we're thinking about blame. So, yeah. This brings us back around to a very large question about consciousness. First point being that consciousness is not a solved pursuit, intellectual pursuit. It's possible it never will be. We just have to get comfortable with that. We don't know. The more things we uncover, the more interesting the questions become. But it's possible that this is not knowable. That's a hard thing to swallow in science, especially in cognitive science, where it's so close to the heart of the things that we believe to be useful and interesting to ask. But we must maintain the possibility that this is just not a solvable question. That we just have consciousness, we just have lived experience, and there's no way to fully explain how that occurs. We're these wonderful mechanical meat machines that navigate the world. We love, we create, we fight, we get tired, but why do we have this conscious experience when we could just as easily be robots doing what we do, right? We think about, on occasion, say, a virus. There's been many that have affected us as a species for as long as we've been alive. And they almost certainly don't have any consciousness, but they do just fine. They are simple proteins that fold in such a way that screws the crap out of our bodies, right? But they do fine. Why are we conscious? Why do I have a lived experience? Why do I not just dimly experience the world going moment to moment? Well, one thought is questions of the soul. I know we're talking science, and we will remain talking science, but an important facet of science is that where science lacks evidence and explanation, there is room for debate. And while I don't personally hold these beliefs, I don't think that they're totally out of line with current thinking on consciousness. We saw philosophies that distinguish between mental and physical stuff, right? There is a mind, and it interfaces with the body, versus the body being, dictating everything. There's some complexity there that we don't yet understand. And perhaps there is some point at which some non-physical entity connects with the physical world by way of ourselves, by way of our bodies, by way of being the thing that gives us and bestows our mortal shell with consciousness. There's another take. I'm more fond of this one. It's a strange one, but it helps to kind of bridge some of these physical gaps we've been talking about. So here's the idea. It may just be that our conscious lived experience is just this natural phenomenon. It's an emergent property of our complex brains. That the way we interact with the world and the systems that we use to do that, consciousness just falls out of it. We just are just self-aware enough because of the way our systems work and need to work that we have this lived experience. Our receptors trigger, our neurons fire, our muscles flex, and our conscious experience is just along for the ride. I actually think that that's heartening. It sounds kind of scary to think that, oh, geez, this whole thing that we're doing, it's just sort of an accident. Oh man, but to me, it speaks highly to the complexity. Complexity is key. It's huge in all these discussions we've had this entire semester, right? And the brain is one of the most complex things that we've ever observed as a species. And I think there is something to this, that the way that the complexity required to navigate the world in the ways that we do navigate it is what gives us that vivaciousness, that consciousness, that conscious experience. The ability to reflect, the experience of remembering a fond memory, right? All just because we are sufficiently complicated. Something rings nicely about that. But I wouldn't deign to tell you what to believe because we just don't know yet. We don't have enough evidence. We will hopefully someday learn more, but this is where we're at with a lot of this. So, that brings us to a gentle slowing of this discussion. I know it's been a long one. You hung in there. I appreciate you. So, what have we discussed? We've explored a lot of questions that don't have clear answers. Welcome to philosophy. And we have talked about, how consciousness comes to bear in our scientific research in the world, and also just in trying to suss out what it is. I would say the strongest takeaway is that you should not be afraid to routinely ask these kinds of questions. We've explored all these kinds of questions, but be willing to ask these questions. Be willing to ask, am I on board with free will, right? Am I on board with emergent consciousness, or is there more of a mind, body, soul something going on? Be willing to ask, hey, what's going on in my brain? What's my lived experience in this very moment? That's how meditation works. Be willing to ask, how does my self-concept differ under different circumstances, like when I have a phone or when I actually have a car available? Be willing to ask, how much of what I'm doing is this intentional thing or this sort of automatic, physical, chaotic, non-free will-ish type stuff? Also be willing to ask yourself, is what I'm experiencing universal? Or is there a difference between me and someone else? And, be willing to ask, who exactly is to blame for my Roomba eating a Lego and catching fire? I can't really blame the Roomba, but maybe I should blame the company. Maybe I should blame myself for leaving the Lego out. But come on, it should be able to eat a Lego. I'm joking, I've never had a Roomba. But the point being that consciousness is the slipperiest of the topics that we've discussed in this course, and I'm glad we got the chance to discuss it more deeply. And I just want to leave you with some thoughts I've had on this same topic that it sort of coalesced over the years. I think being aware that you are a thinking entity, but also that you are a rule-governed and mechanistic entity, and the way that you process and interact with the world is also rule-governed and mechanistic. That's a powerful gift, being aware of all this. So don't hesitate to examine your own thought processes, don't hesitate to question them, and don't hesitate to change them. You exist, so do I. Go on. Thank you. I'll look forward to seeing some of you in the fall.